Okay, so you want to open a toy store. Find a space, line it with shelves, fill them with dolls and toy cars, and watch parents carry their money to your register. That's the plan in your head, and it's not a bad plan. Walk into any toy store on a Saturday afternoon, and it looks like the easiest business in the world. There's a line at the register, kids tugging parents by the sleeve, shelves emptying before your eyes. You watch that scene and you think one thing: this place is printing money. More kids, more toys, more money. Simple. Here's the problem. You are looking at the 1 hour of the week that lies to you the most. Because a toy store is not really a business about toys, it's a business about a parent's emotion that just happens to have toys sitting on the shelves. And the moment you understand that difference, everything about how the store makes money and how it quietly loses it finally starts to make sense. Let's start with what it actually costs to get the doors open, because the price tag is a lot more complicated than rent a space and buy some stock. There isn't one type of toy store. There are several, and each one is really a different business wearing the same costume. At the bottom sits the online shop or the marketplace store, which you can launch for just a few $1,000s, with no floor rent, no staff, and no build-out, living purely on volume and turnover. Above that is the small kiosk or narrow specialty spot, where you pay for a tiny footprint but plant yourself right in the middle of someone else's foot traffic. Above that, the lean specialty store in a lower-cost market, which realistically runs around $60,000 to open, with real fixtures and a proper floor. Then the well-stocked mid-sized storefront, which pushes that to $120,000 to $175,000. And at the very top, a full play experience store in a prime location at $200,000 or more, playing by entirely different rules. Each of these is the same bet on one question: do you make your money from a huge number of people paying a little, or a small number paying a lot? And that single decision shapes every other number in the business. Now here's where the naive picture in your head starts to crack. You think the expensive part is the inventory. It isn't. The expensive part is turning an empty box of a building into a place a parent actually wants to walk into with a child and spend money. And that's trickier than just filling shelves. The landlord wants first month plus a deposit on top before you've driven a single nail. And then comes build-out and design, because in a world where the child decides where to go, a dull gray store loses to a bright neighbor instantly. Then fixtures, shelving, displays, lighting, a register, a card terminal, inventory software, all the things beginners consistently under budget for. And only then the inventory itself, which eats 40 to 60% of your entire opening budget, because half-empty shelves kill sales even faster than high rent does. That's what your opening budget really looks like. A big circle where more than half is inventory alone, and everything else is the walls, the light, and the fixtures around it. You buy it all at once: cars, dolls, building sets, board games, plush, learning toys for the little ones. Because the customer has to see choice, not sad gaps on the racks. And then the shelves are full, the store is alive, the sign is lit, and the bank account is almost empty. And you haven't sold a single toy yet. Because there's a sixth cost almost everyone forgets: a cushion of working capital for the first quiet months, before the flow of customers settles in. This is what sinks the most beginners. They pour every dollar into inventory and build-out, and leave nothing to simply keep the store alive until it reaches profit. Add up the deposit, the build-out, the fixtures, the marketing, the first big buy, and a survival reserve, and even a modest mid-sized store needs $120,000 to $175,000 just to unlock the front door. And a holiday season of working capital can add tens of thousands more on top. So far, so good. Now let's talk about where the money comes from, because on paper it looks absolutely unstoppable. Toys carry gross margins of 30 to 50%, and on specialty items, even higher. So a toy that cost you a few dollars wholesale goes on the shelf at double or more. And that isn't greed, it's the norm of the trade. This is where you start to dream. Don't. Because between that beautiful markup and the money in your pocket stands a whole wall of expenses that the glossy business plans prefer not to show. Out of your revenue, you subtract rent that ticks every single day, whether you sell anything or not. Payroll for staff on shifts all day. Taxes, utilities, the bank's cut on every card payment, marketing, and constant restocking. A big flow of money comes in at the front, and a thin trickle leaves at the back. And that gap between the front and the back is the entire truth of retail. And once you subtract all of it, the average toy store nets just 2 to 10%, which is the money the owner actually takes home after everyone else has been paid. Now let's slow down and honestly count how long it takes to earn your investment back, because this is where the dream meets the arithmetic. Some financial models put break-even for a specialty toy store around 26 months out, which means that first year or two you are essentially working for free, just returning to yourself what you put in at the start. It's a long, winding road where the store itself stays a tiny dot on the horizon for a long time, and more than 2 years before you are truly in the black. 2 years, not 2 months. You need to understand and accept that up front, before you sign the lease, because this is not a sprint, it's a marathon through seasons you aren't even thinking about yet. But before we talk about the risks, we need to crack open the real secret of this business, the twist that changes everything. You think a toy store sells toys to children. It doesn't. It sells emotion to the parent, and the child in this scheme is simply the lever that forces the wallet open. And this isn't my guess. Research shows that over 2/3 of toy purchases happen under the direct influence of the child, with mothers giving in 71% of the time and fathers 54%. Children under 12 directly and indirectly influence enormous amounts of household spending, and the whole store, from the layout to the music, is quietly built around that one simple lever. That's why experienced owners put cheap, bright little items right at the register, the ones a child grabs in the final second. And the parent almost never argues over something so small. And it's often on that impulse junk nobody planned to buy that a disproportionate share of the profit is made. Here's the twist. The inventory you proudly call your assortment is at the same time your worst asset, because every unsold toy is your money frozen solid right there on the shelf. A stack of your cash locked inside a clear block of ice. You can see it, you already paid the supplier for it, but you can't put it to work until someone buys that exact toy. And frozen inventory doesn't turn and doesn't earn a cent. It just quietly ages while the trendy becomes the unwanted. And that brings us to the second layer of the secret. The entire calendar of this business bows to one single month of the year. The holiday season, November and December, brings in a huge share of the whole year's revenue in toy retail. By various estimates, 30 to 60%. And inventory turnover in the fourth quarter spikes to 6 or 8 times a year against a miserable 2 or 3 the rest of the time. December is the gold mine, when people sweep the shelves clean and are willing to sacrifice their own budget for their kids. And that 1 month can decide whether the entire year is profitable. And then January and February arrive, and a deafening silence sets in. Sales collapse, the shelves sit full, and the rent and the payroll still have to be paid every month. Experienced owners don't panic about it. They build their whole cash flow around it, setting aside part of the holiday rush to carry them through the dead months, while the ones who fall into the pit are those who spent the December spike as if it were permanent income instead of a seasonal peak. There are other smaller bumps in the year, back to school, birthdays, spring holidays for outdoor toys, but not one of them comes anywhere close to December. Now that you understand the core mechanism, let's talk about what can sink you, because there are exactly as many risks here as there is temptation. Risk 1 is competition, and it's merciless. The market is saturated, and against you play giant chains and marketplaces with endless assortment and prices a small store can't beat. So just opening another store like everyone else's is a quiet way to go broke. Remember that even a giant like Toys R Us, an iconic international toy chain, eventually collapsed under market pressure and debt. The best reminder of how brutal this business is even for the big players. Risk 2 is that same seasonality. Demand swings all year like a roller coaster, and one blown December can wipe out your whole year of work. Risk 3 is structural. For years, the toy industry itself has been squeezed by mass merchants and e-commerce, shrinking under pressure, and you'll be fighting that same current every single day, no matter how well you run your shop. But there's a surprisingly bright spot, too. Licensed and collectible toys increasingly bought not by kids, but by adults. Grown collectors with real budgets chasing nostalgia. And collectibles carry some of the fattest margins in the industry, occasionally reaching 100%. Risk 4 is choosing your inventory. There are thousands of toy options, and guessing what will actually sell, especially at the start with no data, is nearly impossible. So you're effectively buying blind, and part of that choice will inevitably sit as dead weight of frozen cash. A special trap is trend toys. Every year, the market births a viral hit that flares up and burns out in a matter of months. Fidget spinners, poppets, whole waves you could ride beautifully right up until the wave crashed as suddenly as it rose. A trend's popularity curve climbs almost vertically and falls just as vertically, and the whole trick is to jump on at the start, not the end, because buy the hot batch too late and you're left with boxes of what everyone fought over yesterday and nobody wants today, even on discount. Half your success is decided by suppliers, the layer beginners underestimate the most. The bigger the batch, the lower the price, but the more cash you freeze and the higher the risk of not selling through. So every order is a balance between greed and caution. A smart beginner works with several suppliers at once, to never depend on one, to always compare prices, and to never end up with empty shelves if one lets you down. Because a reliable supplier who delivers the hot products on time is an asset worth more than any beautiful display. Let's slow down and run one simple example on our fingers. Say in a month you sell $40,000 of product, which sounds wonderful, but the product cost you $20,000, leaving $20,000 in gross profit. And out of that you still subtract rent, payroll, taxes, marketing, utilities, and card fees. And what's left is that same modest take-home profit, which is why a seasoned owner never treats revenue as income, only what actually stays in the pocket. Now the legal side, because opening a store the right way is its own layer that also costs money and nerves. In the US, most owners form an LLC, which protects their personal assets, and they line up permits, sales tax registration, and business insurance before the doors ever open. And there's a strict wall almost nobody budgets for correctly. Toys must meet federal safety and testing standards, especially anything for young children, and a product without the right paperwork simply shouldn't reach the shelf. That red barrier is literal. Selling uncertified toys is a fine, a direct risk to a child's safety, and a hit to your reputation all at once. And regulators do not play around with children's products. So it all sounds like a nearly perfect machine. It's not, and by now you understand why. We've covered the costs, the revenue, the central twist, and the risks. And now we can honestly weigh it all and answer the big question. Is it worth opening a toy store at all? And there's no simple yes or no, only a sober balance. The upsides are obvious and pleasant. It's a timeless, clear product, because kids always were, are, and will be. The demand never fully disappears. The margins are generous, and the work itself is working with joy and celebration. But the downsides are just as real and heavy. Fierce competition with chains and marketplaces, merciless seasonality, industry pressure, and a very long payback. This is not the business that makes you rich in 6 months, and anyone who promises otherwise is just selling you a franchise. A toy store rewards those who walk in with a cool head and a calculator, not on a warm wave of emotion from the sight of happy kids. Those who found their niche and their assortment, instead of a faceless copy of the store next door. Those who planned for seasonality and set aside a cushion before the dead of February, instead of spending the December spike in the first week of January. Those who understand trends and manage to surf the wave instead of drowning under its wreckage. And those psychologically ready to work that first year purely to earn their own investment back, without giving up in the quietest, most unprofitable months. For that person, a toy store can become a steady and genuinely rewarding venture for many years. But for the one who came for fast, easy money, believing the picture from the Saturday rush hour, toys will break their heart exactly the way they've broken so many before. That's the sobering truth I promised at the start. A toy store is not a children's fairy tale. It's a grown-up, calculated, fairly harsh business with real numbers and real risks, just wrapped in bright packaging. $150,000 or more to start, 1 to 3 years to payback, and competition that never sleeps a single night. But for the one who is truly ready and understood the real secret, shelves packed with toys really do turn into shelves packed with profit. Because the one who loses is always the one who believes to the end that all the magic hides in one fat markup on a price tag. And the one who wins is the one who understood. The secret isn't the markup. It's what survives after every expense. And it's that single month the whole year lives for. Now you know this business from the inside, with all its levers, traps, and frozen money on the shelves. If this video helped, you know what to do. Subscribe, so we can break down the next business for you the same way, down to the last dollar. And next time, we'll crack open another business that looks like a gold mine, but hides its traps exactly where nobody thinks to look. So, you still want to open a toy store, knowing now about the $150,000 to start, the long year to payback, and the life lived for 1 December? Remember the one thing that actually decides your fate in this game? It was never about how many toys you put on the shelves. It's about how coldly you can count everything that happens after those shelves are full. Your call.